you're all very welcome to this Friday's online Virtual Retirement Café event. So we're joined today by my good friend, Carl Richards, who is, well, I came across Carl when he first wrote this book, The One-Page Financial Plan, that I must admit I haven't actually managed to do. Mine still seems to run to about 40 pages, but I love the idea of it. And Carl, you've got a really interesting backstory, haven't you? I love there's a term in the States of something called securities, isn't there? Which is what we call in the UK, we call shares. Tell us the story about how you got into the financial advising business.
Yeah, so securities is sort of like, right, like a word for any instrument that represents some contract in the real world. So like a bond would be a security, a term deposit would be a security. It's a word that is used much more commonly in the United States. And so there was an ad when I was in, just understanding that background around securities, when I was in university, I was just wrapping up. No, actually, I was in university, in school, and I was recently married. My wife had graduated with a degree in finance, and she had a job. That's a good thing, right? When you're going to school, your wife's graduated, she's got a job. And I come home one day from school. I had a job too. I was working part-time, and I was working for a landscaping company. So I was literally digging ditches for a living at the time while going to school. And I come home one day, and my wife's home, and she's got out the newspaper, and she's flipped open to the help wanted ads, the job posting section. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, I'm looking for a job. And I said, oh, you already have one. And she said, I know, I'm looking for you. I said, oh, okay. What have you found? And she found what we both thought, because we didn't know about this word, securities. We both thought it was like a security guard job, like bouncer at a bar, or like we have these things called mall cops in the United States. So, and you can't tell from here, but I'm uniquely qualified to be a bouncer at a bar. So I thought, well, that, like I could work at night. I thought maybe it was a security guard in a parking lot or something. So I said, I could work at night, still go to school. So I went to apply for this job, and I got like halfway through the interview and realized they weren't asking me about my karate skills or my self-defense tactics. They were asking me about things like shares and term deposits, and I didn't really know. I mean, I was in university. I didn't really know what any of these things were, but somehow I made it through the interview, which tells you a little bit about the applicant pool that day, right? And they narrowed it down to two of us. And this is a true story. It sounds crazy, but they narrowed it down to two of us, and they came out afterwards, and we were both sitting there in the foyer waiting. And they came out and said, "I'm sorry, Carl, we've only got one position, and we're going to offer it to him." And the guy next to me turns to me and says, and this is a direct quote, he says, "Hey man, I don't want the job, you take it." So that was sort of my big triumphant entrance into the securities business, right? Into the investment advice business. And that was 25 years ago. So that's how I got into the business, shall we say, quite by accident.
Yeah. And then in essence, you were selling shares, weren't you?
Yeah, so I was on the other end. I was working at a big company, Fidelity Investments, one of the biggest in the United States, probably one of the biggest internationally. And I was the person that answered the phone. At least I was training to be the person who answered the phone when you're taking care of your own investments, and you call up to do something like, "Hey, I want to sell General Electric, and I want to put that money in term deposit." Right? I was the one that would say, "Okay, I got that," and I would do it for you on the computer. So yeah, that was my job initially.
And did you start to feel that, within a few months you were starting to get an insight into the right things to buy and the right things to sell?
Yeah, what's really interesting, the major lesson from that experience was, it was just a story I'll tell you really quick. So After I got the job, I showed up and we were in training. There was like 6 weeks of training. And we were kind of you could think of it as like a big conference room, like there was maybe, as I recall, there was 20 or 30 of us. And we were learning about, basically, after I figured out I wasn't a security guard, I figured out real quickly that it was a math job, right? Like it was 2 + 2 = 4, and you use calculators and you use spreadsheets. And so everything kind of started to make sense. It was like spreadsheets and calculators, and everything made sense. And 2 + 2 always = 4, no matter how fearful or greedy or worried you are. Like it all made sense. And then one day in August of 1995, there was a big event in the US stock market. And it was a company called Netscape was going to go public. And Netscape was a technology company, and there was a lot of hype around it. If those of you who were around back then, you might remember like the technology boom and bubble of 97, 98, 99, like right as we turned the century. This was the first sort of shot across the bow of what was to come. So this was in 95. And Netscape, just to give you a little bit of the background, Netscape, when they were going to come public, normally that you say, here's the price we're going to come public at. So it was $12 a share. They said, we're going to come public at $12 a share. Well, there was so much demand. So many people wanted to buy that they halted and said, actually, we changed our mind. We're not going to do 12. We're going to do 24. Right. So they had doubled their share price without even a single trade. Right. And there was still so much demand. They opened trading. And during that day, Netscape closed the first day of trading at 72.
Wow.
So they sort of went from like 12 to 24 to 72. Well, we were in training. We hadn't even been out on the trading floor yet. But the call demand was so high that they asked all of us to come out and answer phones. And, I just remember, I remember the feeling of walking out of a room where everything made sense and everything was about spreadsheets and calculators, onto a trading floor where nothing seemed to make sense. Like it was all about energy and emotion, and people were mad and people were excited. And I was like, wow, this is not about spreadsheets and calculators. So that's really, like, I often say that I got into the industry by accident, but I stayed on purpose because of that realization that this was not about money. It was not about spreadsheets and calculators. It was about feelings and worries and concerns and excitement and energy. And that was really the big lesson for me from that entire experience.
Yeah. And so what was the transition from there to, in essence, having your own clients and advising your own clients? And then of course the transition from there as well to, of course, writing and doing your sketches for the New York Times.
Yeah. So I left that big sort of call center, and I went to work for a big brokerage firm, which even here many of you'd recognize. So I went to work for Merrill Lynch.
Yeah.
And there you had your own clients, and so I was giving advice and I was sort of learning, and I had so many crazy stories. I remember this was back in the day where we were still trying to, and many people in the industry are still trying to figure it out. In fact, I would say most of the thing that you think of as the financial advice industry is still trying to figure it out. But I remember going to I had this strange habit that I wanted to know what my job was. Seems sort of crazy. So I would go around asking, like, hey, could you explain to me? Because a lot of what was going on was not making sense to me. And this is sort of can be highlighted by I used to go around to all the older veterans that had been around a long time and just say, hey, could I just ask you a series of questions? I'm trying to learn how to do my job better. You seem like you figured it out. Can I ask you? So I would say things like, what's the one piece of advice that was most valuable to you? What's the one piece of advice you'd have for me as I start out my career? Now, I was really focused on this strange thing of trying to deliver great outcomes for clients over the long time. And I say strange things sort of sarcastically, right? Like, I was focused on the client outcome. And I quickly realized that that was not necessarily what went on in our industry back then. And it's actually not what goes on in our industry a lot today. There's a lot of people who are more focused on selling prescriptions than they are on getting the diagnosis right, if that makes sense. And I remember I asked one guy, his name was John. I said, John, what's the one piece of advice? And he shrugged his shoulders and said, Carl, have a hunch, buy a bunch.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I don't know. That doesn't sound like a process I can follow. That doesn't sound like that's going to deliver reliable results. It sounds like I could have one hunch one day. So that's kind of what the first like 3 or 4 years of my career were about, was trying to figure out like, what's the because I kept seeing mistakes, right? We humans, all of us, we are not hardwired to be good investors. We're not. I mean, I'm not saying there are plenty of us who figure it out, but we're not hardwired for it. Let me explain what I mean. We are hardwired as a species. Human beings are hardwired to get more of the things that give us security and pleasure. And we're hardwired to get away as quick as we can from things that cause us pain. Right? So that behavior has kept us alive as a species. You know, and some of the other things that play into it are like herd behavior. Like, we've always been taught, you stay in the herd and you won't, if you leave the herd, you're going to get eaten, right? Like, that's sort of like, historically, that's the way we've always been taught. And it even has played into some of our lives, you know, in school, like, don't stand out from the crowd. You know, all of those things have maybe been good for us in different ways, but when it shows up in our investing behavior, it doesn't work very well. The way getting more of something that's giving you security or pleasure shows up as an investor, and that herd behavior shows up as an investor, is we tend to want to buy more of something that's already gone up, right? Because that's when the news is good. That's when our friends are investing. That's when the talk around the barbecue is about. We want to get out as fast as we can after things have gone down, because we view that as painful. And in fact, in many ways it is painful because of the feelings we talked about earlier. We translate, like, if this continues, I will not have any money. Like, some of you may have even done this. I know I've done it in the past. Like, if this continues at this rate, I won't have any money in 6 months, or I won't have any money in 2 years, right? And of course, what we forget is things change, you know? So there's all these things at play, all of these things at play that have been really helpful for us as a species. And they're actually really helpful for us in other areas of our lives. Like, let me give you one more example. If you're going to have somebody remodel your kitchen, it makes sense to go look at the work they've done in the recent past, right?
Yeah.
And it's reasonable to expect that the work they would do on your kitchen will be as good, if not better, than their recent work. If you're going to hire a new football coach, it would make sense to look at their track record. So that kind of behavior makes sense in the world. Here's one more example. As an entrepreneur, as a business owner, many of you will have experienced this. One of the first things you're taught in business school or the school of life when in business is that if you've got two divisions and one's doing well and the other's doing poorly, you should get rid of the division that's doing poorly and reallocate the resources to the one that's doing well.
Yeah.
Right? That makes sense. That all of those kind of behaviors, when applied to our investing lives, and even more broadly our financial planning lives, they don't work. It doesn't match up. Like, it's the opposite of what Warren Buffett says, right? I want to be greedy when everyone else is fearful, and fearful when everyone else is greedy. And then one more example of a Buffett quote while we're on the subject is, in most areas of our life, we think action, doing something, hard work, right? Like all of those things generate results. It's hard for us to understand when it comes to our financial lives, and particularly the investment piece. And I know I'm focusing a little bit on that, but that's just because that's what this part of my career was about. The investment piece, we always feel like we should do something if we work harder, and then you've got Warren Buffett saying, this is crazy. Listen to this.
Can you see this, Carl?
Pardon?
Can you see this?
Oh, I've got just my video pinned, so I'm not
Everyone
seeing anything.
else can see the little sketch which I've got holding up, which is the investing done right and watching grass grow. Both are boring. Oh, have I lost you, Carl?
Get muted. There we go. I'm back.
This is the sketch of the investing done right and watching grass grow.
Yeah. It's so it feels counterintuitive, and then you've got Warren Buffett. Like, this is the craziest quote ever. The hallmark of our investment process, the hallmark of our investment process is benign neglect bordering on sloth. So all of those, so when you understand that a lot of our behavior in the other parts of our lives, and even a lot of the behavior that's almost genetically encoded in us as humans, works against us in our financial lives, that's what the first 5 years of my career were about. I'm trying to just get my head around that and realizing that there is well-intentioned behavior that we all engage in that actually, it's well-intentioned. It's what we think we're supposed to be doing. Particularly as investors, we see all the media and the circus. I call it the financial pornography network. We see what all of those people say it means to be an investor, and we think that's how we should behave, and that well-intentioned behavior produces a suboptimal result. And that's what that early part of my career was about finding out. Was like, wow, these things we all think are helping us are actually hurting us. And then you've got somebody like Warren Buffett saying benign neglect bordering on sloth. How do we square that circle? That's what that first 5 years was about.
And then of course there was this big transition where you started trying to get over, I suppose, relatively complex things to your clients, and you were struggling, and you obviously came up with a solution which is quite unique to you. Well, for those who've been to my office, they know that I have a big whiteboard, and I am known to do some sketches, but I did go to math school, not art school. So, you
yeah.
definitely trumped that front. But tell me about that transition.
Yeah. First, let's clear up the art school comment, because you just held up one of those images. It's pretty clear to everybody that there's no art background in my history, right? But the transition came from sitting in front of clients, trying to explain, and I can remember one very specific example. I was trying to explain a subject to two clients, and one of them was an emergency room doctor, and the other spouse was a very successful technology sales rep. So these are two very successful, very smart people, and I'm trying to explain something to them, and I'm just getting blank stares. And it was a concept that I was convinced they needed to understand in order to make a good decision. And I'm just getting blank stares. Now, I said they were successful, smart people. It's clearly not their problem. It was my problem, right? I was not doing a good job of explaining it. And I thought I was pretty good at this. So it was literally sort of just out of an act of desperation that I realized, hey, there's this whiteboard in here. I've never used it. I stood up and drew, and I don't recall what the concept was or what the drawing was, but I'm sure it was just some squares, a circle, and some arrows. And I remember the feeling in the room switch. I remember the thought, and in fact, I remember what they said. They said, "Oh, I get it now." And so it was that moment where I was like, look, so much of what we do, I mean, there's a bunch of things in there. One is a lot of us learn visually. A lot of us learn better when there's visual. And I think the number was something like 80% of people learn better when there's something visual to relate to. Number two, I think when we take something, most of the concepts we deal with when we're talking about money are intangible. And when we take it something intangible and we make it slightly more tangible just by creating an image of it. That's helpful. And number 3, I think the amateur nature of the drawings, I've learned this over the last 10 years for doing them with the New York Times, is it allows people to enter the conversation. It sort of gives people permission to enter the conversation because it feels so casual. It doesn't feel unapproachable, and it's not like we're talking about standard deviation anymore. We're just talking about something on a piece of paper. So I started doing that more regularly, and then I would see the response, and I was kind of puzzled by the response, to be honest. A little while after that first time, I had a client come in. I explained something, and they said, "Hey, can I take that piece of paper with me?" And I was like, I did it on a piece of paper instead of on the whiteboard. I was like, well, I can redraw it and make it. And they're like, no, don't. I want that. Like, I can understand that. And they took it home. And when I saw the paper leave, I remember thinking, I just remember thinking, that's interesting. Fast forward just a little bit, another meeting, a client left and they called afterwards and said, that thing you drew on the whiteboard, is there any way you could draw it on a piece of paper, scan it, and email it to me? And when I saw it scanned and emailed, I just thought, well, I guess I could share this with more people. So that led to putting it up on a website, which, my mom and my sister were reading, and I found out later my sister was lying. It was just my mom. But I kept putting it up. And, one thing led to another. And it wasn't much long. It was like maybe a year and a half of doing that sort of for my mom and my sister, that I got an email from the New York Times, the editor at the New York Times, saying, hey, I love this. Now, listen, I was living in either Utah or Nevada at the time, nowhere near the New York Times. I've never written anything for anybody. I clearly don't have an art background. So when I got this email, I was surprised as anybody, but I knew from my security guard background to say yes and figure things out later. So I said, of course. And that's what started the column at the New York Times.
So you've been running, a regular column for the New York Times for some years now, doing sketches and, with comments about articles around money.
Okay, so I'm going to apologize for this once. I don't know how many of you are out living sort of in the countryside, but we're out in the countryside and there's very little internet connection. So I had to drive in the car up to park right beneath the cell tower is right there. So this is like 10 times better than the internet connection in the house. The downside is it's now hailing. So if there's a little bit of background noise, I apologize. I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't too distracting for you.
No problem.
Yeah, we've been doing that column for the New York Times now it had been weekly for 10 years.
Wow.
Weekly for 10 years.
So what's the sketch that's got you the most traction, I suppose, or the most comments? What's the thing that has provided the most, you conveyed the most value with?
Yeah, I think there's two, and I'm always surprised. I learned early on, actually it took me a couple of years to learn this lesson, that I would send stuff into my editor that I thought, in fact, I often felt this way. I was like, I've got nothing. I remember sitting there on Wednesday morning, and what I'd normally do is take questions that people were asking me or things I was reading in the news, and I would just sort of notice conversations I was having throughout the week. And if there was any trend to them, like, oh, I've been asked that question more than once, I would write the column about it. And then I would try to illustrate the column. The goal was to wrap up what was in the column in one simple image. And there were a lot of times where I couldn't come up with an image. I mean, I went through all these I went through my Venn diagram phase. I went through my bar chart phase. So sometimes I couldn't come up with an image, and I had a deadline. And so I would I was like, this is all I've got. And I would send it in, and I would think for sure there's going to be an email that comes back that says, "This is great, Carl, but we're done." And what I learned early on was some of the ones that I thought, like, this is all I've got, I just got to send it in, got the most feedback, the most positive feedback. And then I'd have the opposite experience where I'd be like, oh, I nailed this one. This one's perfect. This is great. And it'd be like crickets, like nobody cared. So I learned early on to stop. Like, I fired myself from that job of judging my own work. In fact, I wrote a column called that, like, "You're fired. Seriously, pack your stuff and get out." And I was like, the thing you're fired from is judging your own work. Like, your job as a creative person is to do the work and put it into the world. And you let the world decide if it's good, right? So with that little backdrop, Fear and Greed, which is on the cover of my first book, The Behavior Gap, Fear and Greed would be the one that seemed to spread the fastest. I've got the most stories about that. And so I can I've done a lot of art on the radio, and I don't know if, Justin, you're trying to hold that up, but
I haven't got it yet. I'm just looking for it.
Yeah, it may not be in the second book because it was in the first book.
Yeah, but downloaded as well, so I'll have a quick look.
I can describe it. I've done a lot of art on the radio. So just imagine sort of a wave, right? With one peak, and then it goes down again. And at the top of the peak, like it's a wave of the stock market. At the top of the peak, it says greed, which is sort of what tends to happen at the top of a stock market. It says greed, and then it says buy. That's kind of what most of us do. It's obviously the opposite of what your mother told you, that you should buy low and sell high. Instead, most of us buy high and sell low. So it says greed, buy. And then the trough is labeled fear, sell. Right? Again, the opposite of what our mothers taught us, and the opposite of what Warren Buffett says, right? And then there's a little over to the right hand side at the end of the wave. It says ... repeat until broke. And I still think that's funny. Sorry. If you're going to buy high and sell low, you just repeat until broke. Now, this is a good example of the amateur nature of the drawings. It's the repeat until broke part that allowed people permission. In fact, my editor said, your best work is confrontational without being off-putting. So that's the sketch that the most people have walked into financial planners' offices all over the world. Lots of financial planners have this thing framed up on their walls. Yeah, there's a picture of it. Lots of financial planners have this one framed up on their walls. And the story I repeatedly get is clients walking in and going, "Oh yeah," sort of chuckling a little bit, like, "Oh yeah, help me stop doing that." So that one was really popular. And then the other one, Justin, if you can find Focus, I don't know if you can find Focus. It's certainly on the website. Focus is a Venn diagram, and I have to be careful when I use the word Venn diagram. Just so you know, I don't know if you know about this, but there are Venn diagram police in the world. I didn't know this either. They like to send you really long emails about why your diagrams are not Venn diagrams. And I'd get these emails, and I used to defend myself. I would write back like 3-page defenses of why it is. And then I realized, you know what? Why am I engaging with the Venn diagram police? So I now have a standard answer. Whenever I get emails from the Venn diagram police, I send a reply that says, "You're right. It's not a Venn diagram. It's a circle sketch." So here's the circle sketch. Things that matter, things you can control, what you should focus on. That one has been the most universally sort of used, and at this point we're talking millions of downloads. That because it's got more application than just money, and it's become really useful. I've gotten a lot of notes about this over the last couple of months, where people have said, I kind of look at that every day, and I just think, wait, does it even matter? I think that's the order I like to go in. Like, first of all, does it even matter? Because if it doesn't matter, who cares if I can control it or not? Like, who cares? Like, if it doesn't matter, just let go. If it matters, the next question becomes, do I have any control over it or not? And if I do, well, then I can make a plan to take some action. If I don't, then I just, as hard as it is, I have to somehow let go of it. Right. So those are the two that probably have had the most universal impact.
I also, I think quite, if I can get it up, one that I think is absolutely useful at the moment is the speculating investing one. If I could just pull that up.
Is that entertainment investing?
No, it's in Invest Like a Scientist chapter on the one-page financial plan. I'll pull it up in a second.
Yeah.
It's just coming.
Yeah, I think just while you're pulling it up, I think that generally we
There you go.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so speculating, just like it's so interesting how like I would say 90% of the stuff we read when we're reading about investing, the investing news, like that's a circus. It's not investing news, it's financial pornography. And I think 95% of what we see when we think we're seeing about investing is actually really just either entertainment or speculating. So speculating is, I think one easy way to think about this is price versus value, right? So speculating is I buy something with anticipation that the price is going to change in the future, in the relatively short-term future, and I can sell it for something different, right? So price and short-term. Whereas investing is about buying something and anticipating that the value of that thing will change over the long term. So it's more about value and long term. And it's just so crazy to me how I've been watching this for 25 years. It's not getting any better. Like I just had an interaction this morning with somebody who was taking a little bit of offense because they said they want to learn to investing. They want to learn. This was a young person who really wanted to learn to invest and said, should I buy oil? And somebody who's really well respected in the sort of UK based financial planning world and very thoughtful. It'd be somebody like Justin. I could see Justin doing exactly this. Just responded and said, hey, and did it gently, like, hey, I'm just trying to point you in the right direction. That's not investing, that's called speculating. And there was this whole like, well, geez, I'm just trying to learn here. Why are you so patronizing? Like this whole thing. And I was like, no, see, that's still the same point. We're really, really confused. And I actually like to think of it as a financial pornography detox program that we all kind of can go through. And it's, you've gone through it when you sort of look at that stuff and realize it's just entertainment. If you're into that kind of entertainment, I'd rather go to the movies, to be honest, or now I'd rather watch something on Netflix at home. But if you're into it, if you're still into it and you feel like it's important to be aware and knowledgeable, but certainly don't act on it, right? So that to me is, I think, really, really important. And I'm just so puzzled by how we still haven't quite figured it out. Well, I know how we haven't figured it out. Can you imagine the financial pornography networks day after day saying investing and watching the grass grow are the same thing? Buy good things, hold on to them for a long time. Buy good things, like if they said that day after day, nobody would watch them. So I know why it's still going on. It's because it's to generate views and circus, and then there's people selling products. But for real investors, the amazing news is you can be lazy, right? You can have your life back. You can benign neglect bordering on sloth. You can celebrate. Being an investor means I can buy really good things that match which is the work that you do so much of, Justin, is like matching my goals and my values with my use of capital and the way my money's invested. And then once it's done, I can celebrate that I only look at that once a year, right? Like that's cause for celebration, not the opposite. Yes. So hopefully that's helpful.
No, it is. Well, we're getting on. I just want to touch on before maybe if people have got some questions for you, Carl. So I've only got probably one more that I'd like to just ask you about. You're a real campaign at the moment for global about real financial advisors. You know, everyone. You know, you got a whole pack of people signing up to your kind of wisdom and your way of thinking. Tell me about this. Tell me about this the energy that you have for this real financial advice.
Yeah, so I've been all over the world the last 10 years, in particular the last 5. Traveled, spoken at almost every major financial planning conference in the world, and I just still see a little bit about what we were just talking about. The public's perception of what it means to be a financial planner has been completely hijacked by all the actions of the fake financial planners. I understand financial planners, financial advisors, one of the lowest trusted groups of people on every survey. I understand why that is. And the public, everybody listening to this, you're completely justified in that view, because all you've seen are news and headlines of the bad actions. And I used to say of a minority of bad actors, but actually the industry as a whole isn't delivering real financial planning. They're delivering, they pretend, but they're really in the prescription sales business. They're not so interested in diagnosing appropriately. They're very interested in selling prescriptions, right? Like products, financial products. Now, there's nothing wrong. Like, I don't really want to, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. There's nothing wrong with that business model. Like, when you go to the car dealership, if you go to the Toyota dealership, you're expecting to have a battle with the Toyota salesperson to buy a Toyota. You're not expecting the Toyota salesperson to say, you know what, Peter, based on what you've told me, I actually think a Honda would be better for you. Right? That's not going to happen. So there's nothing wrong with the Toyota sales business model. And there's nothing wrong with selling financial products. Nothing. The problem is that they're at the same time using words like trust and we'll put your interests first. And even the commercials are about the family. And so it leaves us consumers relatively confused about who does what job, right? Whose interests are you protecting? Are you selling products for your company, or are you giving me advice for me, right? And that's the problem, is trying to sort out. We know the rules when we walk into the Toyota dealership. We don't know the rules when we walk into the bank or the insurance program or anywhere else. We don't know the rules. And so I'm trying to get more clear about the rules. And the one way to do that is to run around yelling and screaming about regulation. And I'm glad people are doing that. That's great. Keep doing that. But the way I want to do it is I want to keep highlighting the work of amazing financial planners, because people almost don't believe they exist. Like, when I tell people that people like, and Justin's going to get mad at me for doing this, but when I tell people that people like Justin exist, especially when I tell journalists, they say things like, oh, that's cute, Carl, like the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. Like, it's a myth. And so I'm like, I started this thing called the Secret Society of Real Financial Planners, because I was like, no. There are real financial planners out there. And it's, shh, don't tell anyone, right? Like, it's a secret society. And I've been working on that for 10 years. And just about a year ago, I decided, you know what? It's time to make it not so secret. And I'll just tell you last bit about that. Real financial planning, it's pretty simple. It's about working with clients to align their use of capital. And I define capital as time and money. Their use of capital with what they say is important to them. Both sides of that equation have a lot of work. Figuring out what's important to you is actually kind of like a lifetime journey. Many of you probably know that, right? Like, figuring out what's important to you and then aligning your use of capital, putting their clients' interests, putting the client's interests ahead of even their own, being honest. That's a crazy idea. Like, be honest, being nice, right? And then most importantly, being a guide instead of a defender of a map, right? Real financial planners aren't people, like, their value isn't in the map that they drew for you, the financial plan. That's valuable, but it's just table stakes at this point, right? Real financial planners, their real value is in the course corrections, right? It's in being there when the storms blow in that you didn't plan on. It's like the map's useful, but the guide is the valuable thing. So that's why I'm on that kick, because I've just seen so much work of real financial planners quietly going around the world, changing people's lives, and no one knows they exist, and it's time that they know.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your kind words there, Carl. And you're right. It is difficult for people to find good advice and also to realize when it's good and when it's bad. And that's the difficulty, I think. I'm often asked for different parts of the country, well, who can I recommend? And it's a struggle unless I really know someone in that town, so
Yeah.
So I really appreciate your time this morning, Carl, and driving all the way out wherever you've got to, and sitting in the hail and all this type of thing. I'm sure some people might have some questions for you, things that I haven't asked you. So Ryan, I wonder if you can unmute everybody, or if maybe you could just unmute yourselves if you've got a question for Carl, something that I haven't touched on.
And don't be bashful. I've been told that despite our relatively stoic nature in the UK, that we don't have a problem asking questions. So don't be bashful. Unless, of course, we've just done such a thorough job covering everything.
Kathy, have you got anything you'd like to ask Carl? I know you're sat there.
Looks like, Alan, did you move forward because you have a question?
Oh, who's waving? Alan's coming. Here we go. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Justin. Carl, you mentioned that financial advisors don't necessarily foresee or are able to deal with issues of ups and downs in the market with any confidence. One of the biggest problems with financial planners is that they say it was difficult to forecast, and yes, I accept it is difficult to forecast, but you're always in this for the long term. So just stay with it. And there isn't that interjection that you mentioned about what if there is any adjustments that should be made within the plan that has been put together. What's your view of that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Really good question. So let me just be really clear that I think a real financial planner, their value isn't, so any real financial plan would have incorporated, let's talk about the investment sliver, because that's mainly what you're asking about. Like, the investment piece of the financial plan would have incorporated markets going up and down in the future, right? Mainly because markets have gone up and down in the past. It'd be crazy not to assume that they wouldn't go up and down in the future. So, and I want to be careful about how I'm phrasing this. Any real financial plan would have planned for the event, at least the stock, just separate out global pandemic for a minute, just like the stock market event we've had. Any financial plan would have planned for that event happening because they've happened in the past. So we knew things like this would happen. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying we knew global pandemics. I'm not saying we knew this event. I'm not saying any of that stuff. I'm just saying we knew markets would go up and down really dramatically because it's happened in the past. So the question becomes, the guide part is like, look, a storm just blew in. Now realize every one of these storms is different. So often you hear people say, like, the last 4 words of any great investor is, this time it's different. But those words are actually true. Like every one of these really, I call them scary markets, every scary market, and this might be the scariest one ever. I don't know. I don't know. Like when you add what's going on in the world, the stock market actually hasn't behaved all that crazy, which is quite surprising. I mean, I know it was crazy for a couple of weeks, but like over the last year, we're even. That's kind of amazing. But let's still call it a very scary market, given what's going on in the economy and many of our personal lives. Like, it's very scary. The value of a real financial planner in a scary market is not that they know what's going to happen next. It's that they know how to deal with what's happening now. Right? And so the ability to sit down with you, here's how I think of this. And this is all taken from complexity theory. We see this showing up in other areas like software development and entrepreneurship, called agile development and lean startups. And but complexity theory is my favorite way to view this. When you're navigating a complex adaptive environment, and that's certainly what we're in right now, a complex, adaptive, and adaptive because when you interact with your financial planner, your investment portfolio, you change the system, right? Like, because if you decide to sell or add or change, your interaction with the system changes the system. So it's adaptive. So complex adaptive system, the only way to navigate in a complex adaptive system, and this is right from the academic literature, is solve for the next local optimum and then reset. The layman's way of saying that would be take the next step. And the nice thing about this, and I'm gonna get even more pointed here in a minute to your question, Alan, is the nice thing about this is it fits right in with what humans are good at. We're not particularly good at dealing with the problem in the future. Always our version, like risk management means looking backwards, seeing what happened and trying to be better prepared for it next time. But guess what? The thing that's going to happen next time is not the thing that happened in the past. So we're not very good. Risk management is not something we're particularly good at. But what we are really good at, is dealing with the situation we're in right now, right? Like we're really good as humans at looking at each other and go, you know what? I don't know, but let's figure it out. Right? That was, I don't know if you remember the TV show MacGyver, right? Like duct tape and bubble gum, trying to fix the plane while it's flying. Like we're really good at that. That's what the value of a real financial planner should be, is like, okay, we had a flight plan. It was very detailed projection of the next 20 years of your life. It's called a flight plan. Guess what, Alan? A storm just blew in and we're in really turbulent weather. You and I are in the cockpit together. I got this, right? Like, you know, the only thing worse than being in the cockpit in scary, turbulent weather is seeing your pilot scared. So a real financial planner needs to understand that they can say, look, we got this together. Let's figure out. And depending on the circumstance, like for some of you, if you're retired and you're drawing money off a portfolio and you're drawing 3 or 4% off your portfolio, then that circumstance isn't quite as volatile as maybe the person down the street that made a decision to open 5 restaurants last year. So depending on how volatile the situation is, depends on the rate of change, like how often you're thinking, what should we do next? So what can be dangerous is a lot of financial planners right now are just hiding because they're scared and they think their job was to defend the map they drew. And they don't realize their job is to be in the cockpit right now, looking with their clients together saying, okay, what are we going to do? Now, let me just give you one example. In a retired scenario, like I'm retired, I'm pulling a little bit of money off my portfolio. What are some examples of things we could do? It would be historically, it's a little dangerous to think we should make changes to the portfolio based on the market being scary or not. Because it's just, I've looked, I can't find any reliable way to do that. Just about the time I decide to make a change is when the market changes. Right? So what are some other changes we could make? Well, maybe we could maybe we don't take our inflation adjustment raise this year. Maybe we could pull a little bit less out this year. Maybe we could, if we're pre-retired, maybe we could save a little bit more. maybe we could rebalance, which is the idea of just getting back to the original plan asset allocation. So those are those kind of subtle adjustments. And I've been talking with planners right now that, have clients that are in retired phases, pulling 3 or 4% of their portfolio out every year. And some of the tools we use, I won't go into lots of depth, but one of the tools we use is Monte Carlo, which gives you sort of a confidence rate that your plan is still going to work. And they may have been 92% before the scary market, and they think that the world's ended. They come in, they sit down, and they meet, and they're 85%. That's not the end of the world. What can we do is the question that planners should be asking. Okay, what should we do? Oh, could you guys afford to not take your inflation adjusted raise this year? Oh yeah, we can do that. Like, that's the kind of proactive thing that I would expect a real planner to be doing right now. Is that helpful, Alan? Okay.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah.
Alan's actually sadly not a client of ours, but all the other clients on the call will all realise that they've experienced exactly that with me in the last few months, and in all the planning work that we've done. So that's all good news. I feel quite relieved that we've done everything that you suggested there, Carl.
well, it wasn't going to change what I had said, even if you hadn't, but I was pretty confident that you had. But here's one thing I'll just point to for all of you to know. Look, I'm seeing this all over the world and all over the country right now in the UK. Like, most people calling themselves financial planners and financial advisors, they don't know what to do either. They're scared to death. They're hiding. And one thing you'll notice, a hallmark of that kind of advice, is when somebody sprays you with facts and figures. Like, you come in and you say, look, we got to do something. What are we going to do? And they say things like, oh, geez, that's kind of silly. Haven't you seen if you miss the 10 best days in the stock market? That's the classic graph everybody pulls out. And the average bear market is this. They start spraying you with facts and figures instead of saying, wait, my friend, I understand why you're scared. Like, that's the hallmark of somebody who thinks they're a defender of an outdated map, is they start being a little defensive. A guide, on the other hand, has room for empathy, has room to say, hey, I get a little scared too when I watch the news right now. Let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. What should we be doing here? What adjustments can we make? And again, I want to point to the restaurant person, because some of you may either be in that situation or know somebody where the plan has blown up, right? Your long-term money has just become short-term money and you don't know what to do. I just want to point to that example. Like, a real planner would be in the trenches with their sleeves rolled up with you right now, saying, okay, you need to call the bank, right? When the bank gets back to you tomorrow at noon, I want to be on the phone at 1 with you, right? And that's just that same thing of assess the situation, take the next step, reassess, sped up, right? Because the volatility of the situation. And that's what I mean when the difference between a real planner and a fake one is the real ones are, and they go home exhausted and scared too, right? But we don't care. That's their job right now. You know what I mean? Their job right now is to be there for us. They can be exhausted and scared at home on their personal time. Right now, we need them in our corner helping us.
Yeah.
Right? And I've got plenty of empathetic hugs for them too, but this isn't the place for their empathetic hugs. It's their job. That's what they signed up to do.
Yeah.
All right,
fact,
Justin.
Coming back to
take that back.
Coming back to your analogy, Carl, of going to the cockpit and the scariest thing for anyone is to get to the cockpit of the aircraft and find out the pilot's not there.
Yeah. Or doesn't know what they're doing or is scared. So yeah, good.
So that's brilliant. We're on the hour now, so we've used your very generous time, Carl. I really do appreciate you taking time out of your day and coming and chatting to us all. It's been really fascinating, as always, to hear you. I thank you for your time and your generosity. It's you've been a great influence on what I do, and I know your mission to improve the financial advice across the world is just amazing, because I know the impact that good financial advice can make, and that's what we both want to happen. So I really do appreciate your time this morning.
Amen, Justin. Thank you. Look, on behalf of everybody here, let me just tell you, we all know you don't have to be doing this, right? So thanks for your generosity and just trying to make a difference in the world, because we all, speak on behalf of the people, we all need more of these stories, more of this kind of opportunity. So thank you. And cheers, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Look forward to speaking with you all soon.